Now, we could step up to the first keynote. And ladies and gentlemen, the first keynote will be delivered by Professor Gonzalo Calvo Rojas, Senior Consultant and Head of the Clinical Pharmacology Department at Hospital Clinic, Barcelona. Professor Calvo brings expertise in clinical pharmacology and European regulatory science, including direct involvement in the evaluation of some of the ELE's ATMPs reviewed by the European Medicines Agency. His keynote is titled Key Cross-Cutting Challenges in ATMP Clinical Trials. Professor Calvo, the audience is eagerly awaiting your lecture.
Thank you very much. Is that enough? This is. Okay, good morning, Minister. People from chess screen, very nice to meet you again once more. Jax and the people from Ekran and all colleagues, I feel at home today because apart from my past regulatory activity at the ATMP, I was the first rapporteur of an advanced therapy medicinal product in 2007, was an adenovirus transfecting glioblastoma cells and trying to destroy by the administration of an antiviral. I mean, this past experience gave me two views in the sense that now I am the head of the Department of Clinical Pharmacology in Hospital Clinic in Barcelona, and we are developing academic CAR T-cell trials. And now, when I was a regulator, I didn't understand many times the applicants. And when we are applicants, I don't understand many times the regulator. So this is not an advantage because I should have learned to understand both sides. And the only result is that I don't understand any of the sides. So, I mean, but I have understand why. I would like to thank also to my colleague, Eulalia Leste, that is here, that is co-author of the paper that motivated this talk when Lenka called me a couple of months ago. And I think that I'm not speaking on my behalf, but I'm speaking on the behalf of the academic clinical trials, the advanced therapies development in a hospital clinic, and more particularly from that regulatory team that I have the honor to chair. Okay, let's start by saying that a very simple sentence that I think everybody would know, maybe under the initial expectations, that CAR T cells have shown an impressive efficacy and safety results in severe hematologic conditions, essentially malignant hematological condition, but also coming data on solid tumors, and a lot of data are coming in autoimmune disease, and we are currently developing in this field. However, this is a general statement, but when you go a little bit more in depth, then you know what the difficulties are. And the minister has highlighted very well what the problems are. Is the manufacturing and the development is extremely costly and complex. The difficulties in product distribution, either if there is central manufacturing of the cellular product, or indeed, and we were talking, my colleague Laura will talk this afternoon about the point of care strategy. That is something that will be innovative. We are the first proposing this initiative in Europe. But obviously, it is difficult, the product distribution, because our autologous drugs, I mean, you need to take the apheresis to select the lymphocytes, to send to the company or to the manufacturing site. They manufacture the CAR T cells and then put back to you in the hospital. This is very costly in terms of money, but also in terms of time. The vein-to-vein time is around 1 month. That's meaning that many patients may die meanwhile. They need to receive aggressive therapy in order to maintain their health status before they can receive the CAR-T. There are also social and geographical barriers, and we will learn about that a little bit. And there are now the future CAR-T cells, autologous CAR-T cells, in the medium term, maybe in the short term, will become outdated. I mean, there are initiatives thinking that you don't need to capture the cells of the patient. You can provide the gene therapy with not autologous cells or with no need for cells at all, just directly the lentivirus through nanoparticles, through a different ways of that. So theoretically, this is a shocking strategy, a new strategy to deal with very severe disease, but in fact is the implementation of the strategy has many barriers. And just to prove that, this is, for the last 10 years, the number of advanced therapies in the green fraction, you see the tissue engineering product, in blue, the gene therapy products, and cell therapies in the last row. You see that almost all have come to Europe for marketing authorization, and all except 4 were approved by the European Medicines Agency. So the main barrier is not regulatory. It's a barrier, of course. It's a barrier for companies, but of course also for academia. But the main barriers is not regulatory. The main barriers is that if you take into account all patients with acute leukemia, lymphocytic leukemia, and with non-Hodgkin lymphoma and multiple myeloma, that are the 3 hematological diseases that are essentially covered by CAR-T cells, theoretically, only 1% of those patients across the world, from 2.4 million to a little bit more than 11,000 patients, has been actually treated with CAR-T cells. Some of them would have not been candidates, that's for sure, but 1% is much less than optimal. And the reasons for these access problems, here you have. Many of them are related to the patients. Is the status of the disease, the patient fitness, the patient choice. Some patients reject to be treated with such an innovative therapies, less and less, because it is not that innovative already. But there are some reluctance in some patients. But these are the minimum part of the patients that actually have no access. The main issue is reimbursement. It is not affordable at the cost that they have in Europe, particularly, but above all in the US, it is simply prohibited. The manufacturing issues, for instance, the first CAR-T for multiple myeloma, Abecma from Bristol Myers, was approved in the States, was approved in Europe, but there was a shortage for more than 1 year because they didn't have manufacturing capacities to cover the market. And initially was introduced in the United States, but in Europe took more than 1.5 years. And then when it became available, it was accepted that it was not as good as Carvykti or even as or CAR-T for multiple myeloma. So it was a loss of opportunity for the company, but it was 2 years without CAR-T cells for the patients because they didn't have the manufacturing capacity that they should have had. And also there are hospital capacity. Not every hospital, probably in the future it will. Even we are starting with the experience of at-home administration of CAR-Ts. So things in very selected patients with low burden of the disease, with low risk for cytokines release syndrome. I mean, very selected patients can be treated at home or in a facility that is close to the hospital. But at the very beginning, when you treated a patient with a CAR-T, one of the first requirements is that you have to have a bed available in an intensive care unit, because it was not so obvious and not so predictable which patients would be suffering for serious adverse events, and you need to be prepared for translation. But all these problems lead to a situation. It was done by our group and essentially by Julio Delgado, that is one of the pioneers in academic CAR-T cells in Europe. It was data from 2 years ago, exactly 2 years ago, and was based on a survey to the hematological community across the European Union. And checking it was which are the CAR-T cell products that are available and reimbursed in your country. Green means available and reimbursed. Yellow, that is the case from Luxembourg. Some are available, the minority, but the rest can be treated in Germany and Belgium, and the Luxembourgian government pays for them. And red is no. Theoretically are available because the approval is for the whole European Union, but they are not reimbursed. So in fact, they are not available in that countries unless there are rich patients that can cover the cost. So this is the reality. The reality is that, well, advanced therapies, we need them to get approved. There are regulatory barriers. You have seen the regulatory barrier, only 4 of them were withdrawn or not approved. The barrier is in the reimbursement. The barrier is in covering the cost associated to CAR-T cell therapies. And of course, from slides from the EMEA, there are other options. There are the option of, whoops, I cannot point out. Okay. Of course, you have the normal approval. You have clinical trials. You have the possibility for use, compassionate use, for treat patients on a named patient base. But all these alternatives are still to be paid, except some cases of compassionate use. All the alternative routes to treat patients, first, are not for the vast majority of patients. A second, have to be paid as well. So fortunately, the regulation of 2007, well, fortunately for some of us, unfortunately for some of us, contemplated the possibility of giving what is called the hospital exemption approval. That is a very, very restrictive way that in a hospital, ATMPs can be prepared on a non-routine basis, covering essential quality standards, and only produced for single individual patients. That is a kind of compassionate use, is a case of patient name basis. But in Spain at that time, the government was very clever. The Ministry of Health was very clever, and decided to develop a royal decree developing in detail what are the requirements for an advanced therapy medicine approval to get a hospital exemption approval, and widened as much as possible the practical utilization of that. That meaning that in Spain, you need to have a full dossier of quality, not some data, a full CTD dossier of quality, can be in Spanish. This is the only advantage. According to GMP, you have to have a full CTD dossier of non-clinical, with non-clinical efficacy and safety data, but also with off-target evaluation of possible actions of the CAR T cell product outside the target cells, and with a clinical trial showing the benefit and showing that the efficacy is still sustainable. I have to admit that normally these clinical trials in the setting of academic trials are single-arm trials, are not comparative, essentially because you can compare with useless alternatives. And we have thought sometimes to do that, but you should compare with the standard of care. And an academic institution cannot pay for a comparative arm with another trial that is 400,000 euros. So it is, but the data are there. The dossier is delivered to the Spanish agency. There is a strict evaluation taking more than 1 year in the evaluation. They request a lot of clarifications. My colleagues, Laura and Eulalia, are fed up sometimes with regulators. And I said, calm, keep calm. Everything can be solved. Sometimes can be solved, sometimes cannot be solved. But at the end, we got to approval under hospital extension. What will be in the future? We don't know. Maybe there are here people from the European Commission that can help us during the day to know what will be in the next regulation regarding this date. What cannot be, and I understand companies, I understand regulators, and I understand the European Commission, cannot be a full alternative path to the centralized approval, and cannot be a kind of mutual recognition procedure for advanced therapies, and should be in principle restricted country by country, hospital exception, evaluated by country, and decision on the basis of the data produced in that country. This is something that almost everyone could accept, but we'll see. Maybe we can discuss later. Okay, so we got the hospital extension for RE0001, that is a CD19 CAR-T, and the hospital extension 2 years later for CAR-T RE0002H. H is because it's humanized, and it is for multiple myeloma third line. For this first one, we approached the EMA, we got prime designation, and we are in the process. But then comes the barrier, and sometimes the reason because you don't understand some regulatory positions. They have asked, apart from not very strong suggestion on the manufacturing, they have requested us to run a multinational clinical trial. And I can tell, I could understand in some very differential disease prognosis in different areas of the world. But acute lymphocytic leukemia, the protocol for the treatment is standardized across Europe. Acute lymphocytic leukemia has about the same prognostic factors if the treatment is equal. The only differential issue is the genetic of the disease and the age of presentation. So asking us, an academic institution, to run a multinational clinical trial, I think is a little bit too much, and will delay the presentation for a centralized approval by at least 2-3 years, because we are now, and you will look at the clinical trial this afternoon, if Laura is able to survive until that time. Okay, we have treated more than 600 patients with academic cards, so it's not anecdotic. We have treated, and we have extended, because the Spanish government and the Spanish agency has allowed to expand the use of our academic cards to other hospitals, selected hospitals that will have to present the dossier and will have to be approved one by one. And the idea is to extend the manufacturing facilities in a way that every single center, at least selected centers across the Spanish geography, can produce the cells. We send the lentivirus, we run comparability manufacturing with every single facility. Will not be 100 facilities, cannot be, but 5, 6. facilities across Spain, and we have to demonstrate that the final product, the final CAR T cells are comparable, and then we will have this implemented in Spain. We have some experience already with a couple of centers. Okay, so going to our history. How do we organize ourselves? Well, the honest response is as best as we can. That is not far from being optimal. I mean, in a company, you have a common objective, a common project, everyone is fighting for the same project. There may be egos, but the egos are subsidiary to the success of the main objective. Hospitals are very different. Even the culture. For an academic scientist, the first thing in the world is publishing. And they publish before time. The main objective is, I need these results because the AHA meeting, the American Hematology Society meeting, is coming, or the ASH or whatever. So it's a different culture because our career is depending on publishing. It's not depending on the objective of getting an hospital exemption. But okay, we do our best. There are four pillars in this. There are five. The first that is not in the central triangle is the basic science, the people that think about the target, identify the target, make the genetic construct, and build the first proposal for the CAR-T. Then there is a immunology department that is in charge of the manufacturing, the production under GMP. Then is the hematology, oncology, and now the internal medicine with the autoimmune disease. And there is the most important thing in the world, the clinical pharmacology department that is in charge of producing the dossier and discussing with regulatory bodies what part of the dossiers need to be improved in order to get the marketing authorization. Oh, 3 minutes. I will go faster. So what the problem is? Well, the different views on how to deal with that. I mean, we are regulators. I was regulator, but many of my colleagues has a quite extensive experience in regulator, and we understand what are the normal requirements. For the immunologists, it is extremely difficult to think why regulators put so many and so high barriers in order to get the product approved. It is not a matter of who is right, who is wrong. It's a philosophical concept. They say, well, some gene therapies may be medicinal product, but this is an auto transplant of lymphocyte modified genetically. But it's like an autologous transplant. And I don't know who's right and who's not. What I tell them is, okay, you have the right to protest. You have the right to lobby in order to change that, I think, with very low probability of success. But what is completely useless is because I don't agree, so I do not comply with. Because this is the way of not giving access to patients. They are talking all the day. No, the first priority is my patients. And first I told them, the patient are not yours. The patient owns themselves and take decision themselves. But the second is, if you want your drug reaching the patients, meet the requirements. Otherwise, you will never. And you can protest and you can go to the media and say, well, the bureaucracy is limiting the access of patients to advanced therapies. Maybe true, but you will not get a faster solution just by going to the press. Okay, this is I think I will skip because Laura, but okay, it is just the slides can be shared with everyone. The main key challenges in all the steps, the manufacturability challenges, what is the challenge consisting of, and what are our solution, not the regulatory solution. It's our solution for each of them. There is another page for non-clinical, and there is another page for risk benefit. So you can get scared. This is our pipeline, including, you may think these guys are crazy. And I can only tell you, you are absolutely right. I don't think we can afford that. But people have ideas and don't want his idea to be left out. And then it's a hospital, you know how a hospital is. But some of them are very good ideas. We have the CD19 and the BCMA already approved and aiming through scientific advice to the EMA, and with the final endpoint of getting it approved is 8 seconds, but I will take 5 more seconds. We are developing a dual CAR for non-Hodgkin lymphoma, resistant to other CAR Ts. We have a CD17, we have an HER2, we have a number being developed, and most of them already in phase of scientific advice with the Spanish agency and non-clinical development, and some of them non-clinical development. This is crazy. We will not succeed unless we find for alternatives. But this is my personal opinion. This is nothing that is published. So we have the academic perspective, regulatory bodies, except I have to admit, and one guy that you probably know, that is Julio Delgado, that is an hematologist that initially was completely reluctant to regulatory mandates, but now is a very good knowledge of regulatory aspects, and he understands, but the rest of the people do not understand. Then we have the regulatory perspective that they say we want to promote academic development, but they look at us with some suspicion that these guys, what are doing, and I understand as well. And then we need to find in the balance. We need to be convincing with them that we are not doing stupid things, that we are not putting at risk patients' life, that we are providing alternatives, not competing options, but alternatives to make CAR-T accessible for some patients that cannot access. For information, the cost of medium cost of a CAR-T in Spain is between 350,000 euros or 400 plus thousand euros, or CAR-T is at 100,000 euros. So it's much more affordable because we produce at zero cost, at zero benefit. It is not fair to have a benefit when your clinical trials, when your development has been done with public funding. So it is unfair to go for benefit. We need some benefit in order to keep the machine going on, not at the level that I have shown in the previous slide. So I think I can finish here and open to discuss if there is any for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your insightful thoughts, and also for being timely. And we have a short time for discussion, 5 minutes, maybe 1-2 questions. So if you have any question, please raise your hand and my colleague will hand over a microphone to you, or we can also read the question that were asked online. So are there any questions? And I see.
I can tell you that all the speakers will be on time, because here you have a clock like a bomb turning out red when the time is finishing. Okay.
Yeah. The goal was to stress you.
It's a useful strategy, yes.
So you're here in the middle, Jürgen Kuber, UMC Utrecht, the Netherlands. So impressive always what you do in Barcelona. You didn't touch completely on the new pharmaceutical legislation, which is coming out, which has a huge impact on what you are doing.
Yeah,
What
I roughly mentioned, but with some question marks.
Because it's about cross-border. How do we deal with cross-border? It is about they really don't want to us to mimic pharma. And the last one, which I'm still wondering, what's the end game of what we are doing? Is the end game that you get access in Spain, or is the end game that, for example, with the Netherlands, you get in multiple countries access?
Yeah, it's a complex answer. Yes, the final end is, or the final objective is to get access wherever it is needed. And we have agreement with Australia for the BSMA, with some South American countries. But then the regulatory issue has to be solved by them. In Europe, we have all together to solve or to come out the regulatory issues. With the Netherlands, we have a strong collaboration with Groningen, with Leiden, and they are running part of the clinical development, for instance, the CD19 in lymphoma. And this is a comparative clinical trial in front of Yescarta. This is the standard of care. Why this is possible? Because the Dutch government put the money. They have a vision that, okay, I meant 30 million euros, and it's an investment. It's not a funding a clinical trial, because if it is successful, I will have a CAR-T much cheaper than Yescarta. This is my perception. But yes, we are running also a clinical trial, a comparative clinical trial in multiple myeloma. It is about to start. And we will be running a clinical trial international in acute lymphocytic leukemia in the adult. That will be different countries. But in Europe, it is not a regulatory issue. Is the complexity of funding, the difficulties for crossing border possibility of the money. Holanda put money, but the money had to stay in the Netherlands. Spain can put money, but the money need to stay in Spain. So running multinational clinical trial outside the European Commission funding is very difficult. We are going to do that, but it's very difficult. So the main outcome in the medium long term is to get a European marketing authorization application. Meantime, we need to run different strategies in order to get that different, not all, it will be impossible, but that different European regulatory bodies nationally can accept that this is an option and give the European, the hospital exemption. But this is something we don't know, because the European regulation is still to come. There are some ideas that will be closer to the Spanish model, but I have my difficulties in believing that they will allow for getting, for one single product, 8 hospital exemptions in 8 different countries, because this is against the idea of one single European market. But this is just opinionative. It is not something that I know. If you have any information about the future regulation, please comment with us.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I'm very sorry that we will not allow any other questions because we are slightly behind our schedule. Thank you very much for your presentation.
You are expected.